as a weapons inspector. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Little embarrassed to be called beautiful, but that's just the old-fashioned Marine in me.
um, that we were talking about striking while the iron is hot, and right now, what's the hot topic? What's the main story? It's this counteroffensive in Ukraine. I was wondering if you could just give us your thoughts and your overview of what's happening in Kharkiv, in Kherson, and the situation in general. How come the Russians lost so much ground in such a short period of time? Did they do that on purpose? Was this a calculated decision, or just something really embarrassing that took them by surprise? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let me emphasize that all I'm able to give you are my thoughts. I no matter how much I try, President Putin and General Marshal Shoigu won't put the alert phone on my desk, and so I can't call them up and say, "Hey, what's going on? What mistakes did you make?" So, I'm going to say some things. I'm going to say them with authority, meaning that I believe them. But as I always remind people, you take this kind of long distance analysis with a grain of salt, because first of all, we're dealing with instant history. So whatever data is available is unprocessed data. Usually it involves some reports straight from the front lines or from the vicinity, people who are emotional, et cetera. So, there's a whole lot of filtering that would normally be done before, commenting on this. So
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would ask people is, listen to what I'm saying, but man, do your own homework, verify, check on things. Because this is an emotional issue. This is like we said, it's a topical issue. It's a red hot issue. And there's a lot of people who are emotionally tied to Ukraine from one side or the other. There's people who are sympathetic to the government of Ukraine, who are ecstatic about what's happening. There's people who are sympathetic to the government of Russia, who are in a deep depression about what's happening. And I think it's imperative that everybody just take a step back, take a deep breath, relax. Unless you're on the front line, your life is not at risk. I know you might have relatives, you might have friends whose lives are at risk, but there's nothing you can do about that right now. The purpose of a show like this, I believe, is to encourage debate, dialogue, and discussion, to have a foundation for a deeper understanding. But that deeper understanding doesn't come from somebody dictating to you. It comes from you absorbing information and formulating your own opinion. So I view what we're doing here today as a tool to accomplish that for the viewer. And I say that because a lot of people put a lot of weight on what I say, and I'm honored, but it's also a huge burden, because if I had to be guaranteed that every time I spoke I had to be 100% correct, I'd never speak. So we just need to we need to proceed responsibly and cautiously. Now, having said that, I'm now going to act like I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. Last May, I had an interview with Garland Nixon, an American media personality, a radio talk show host. He has a podcast, and he was interviewing myself and Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst, about the situation in Ukraine. And this was at a time when the United States was considering the Lend-Lease package, $43 to $50 billion worth of military assistance and other assistance to Ukraine. This was a time when, in addition to the provision of heavy equipment, United States and NATO were providing training for the Ukrainian military outside of the borders of Ukraine, which meant that suddenly Ukraine had this strategic depth provided to it. If Ukraine wanted to train forces inside Ukraine, there was always the risk of a Russian missile coming in and hitting. Danger of interviews from the home front, hitting a barracks, killing people, disrupting the training. But now they're being trained in Germany, they're being trained in England, they're being trained in France. So it's immunity, and and vulnerability that's been provided. And I said at the time that this was a game changer, a fundamental game changer. That if prior to this, I think the military math, the calculations that you do in your head when you're a professional military analyst, the military math made it clear that Russia was going to win, hands down. Now you throw in $53 billion worth of equipment, strategic depth, intelligence, command and control, other assistance, and you realize that this was a changed reality, which meant that maybe the 200,000 person cap that Russia had put on the special military operation wasn't sufficient for the task. And I raised these issues and I was raked over the coals. I mean, I was called a traitor. I was called a flip-flopper, the old Ritter switcheroo. We can go on and on and on. But I stood by it. I said, look, it's solid analysis. If you're not willing as an analyst to absorb new information and make new assessments based upon this new information, then you're not really an analyst. You're just a propagandist. And what happened? A new reality hit us on September 1st. There was a major counteroffensive by the Ukrainian military. And I think when one takes a look at what the quality of the military that Ukraine brought to the field on September 1st when they started this counteroffensive, we were looking at a new reality here. In the past, I think we could have said that the Ukrainian army was trained and equipped by NATO, but it was a Ukrainian army. The army that's in Ukraine today, fighting the Russians, is a NATO army that is manned by Ukrainians, but it is a NATO army. This is a whole new level of fighting, a whole new level of reality. Because it's not just about the equipment, it's about the operational theory, it's about the tactics being used, it's about the quality of fire support being used, it's about the intelligence being provided, it's about the command and control, it's about the logistics, it's about the whole package of how the Ukrainians fight wars today. And let's just start off with what happened, the initial attack. Ukraine had been telegraphing that it was going to come after Kherson for a long time now. Zelensky was talking about the million-man army. They were talking about disrupting the notion of a referendum in Kherson. They were talking about punching through the Russian army and cleansing out Crimea. All of this stuff indicated a major effort to the south, and the Ukrainians didn't disappoint. They sent several tens of thousands of troops against in the Kherson direction. They were repulsed in heavy fighting. The Russians were talking about 1,700 dead on the first day. I can't verify those numbers. Those are numbers that are being reported. There were, anecdotally, you can say there were videos of, an endless stream of ambulances coming in from the front, allegedly carrying casualties. Ukrainian prisoners of war speak of, uncounted dead and wounded. But what we do know is they didn't crack the defense. The Russians held. But the Ukrainians pressed home the attack. They kept coming day after day after day, to the extent that Russia was compelled to commit its reserves. Its theater reserves were committed in the direction of Kherson. And this is important because, we've talked previously about phase one of the Russian military operation, and I talked about maneuver warfare and how the Russians used what I call a feint or a diversionary attack movement on Kiev to make it look like they were threatening Kiev, to freeze Ukrainian forces in place and to get Ukrainian reserves committed to that front. And I talked about maneuver warfare and how the Russians were masters of that art. It appears the Ukrainians have been mastering it as well, because the Kherson effort by Ukraine was a fixing attack, a diversionary attack. And in order to be a diversion, you have to make people believe it's the real thing.
Right.
And that's why Ukraine pressed it aggressively, lost the casualties they did. They were driving home that we're really going after Kherson. And they succeeded in getting the Russians to release the reserves. And then suddenly they struck somewhere else with another 20 to 30,000 troops. The place they struck was Kharkov. Now, here's the difference. In Kherson, the Russians were ready. They had defenses deployed in what I would call a doctrinal nature. Nothing's perfect in any war. You can take a when I say doctrine, I can get a piece of paper and map out what a Russian defense should look like doctrinally, 20 kilometers in with 15 to 20 kilometers depth. I can draw the perfect reinforced company strong points, battalions deployed in depth, fire sacks. It all looks pretty, but then you put that in the real world. Terrain's different. Some units are worn down. Some units were never staffed fully, etc. But the bottom line is you basically replicate the notion of what doctrine calls for. And in Kherson, they had adequate frontage. And what I mean by that is the gaps between Russian strong points weren't too big. They were small enough so that if the Ukrainians tried to squeeze them, they'd get hit by fire on both sides. The Russians use something to call a fire kettle. It's in their artillery doctrine, it's maneuver by fire, which means that as the enemy advances, you break up their advance with artillery coming in. You have strong points that channel the enemy into kill zone. And then the artillery comes in and pounds them, and bam, they're all dead. Kherson was set up doctrinally. It worked. Kharkov was different, and it shouldn't have been different. And this is where we get to the crux of the issue here. In Kharkov, we had two of the premier fighting forces in the Russian military, the 1st Guards Tank Army and the 20th Combined Arms Army, units that had a great history dating back to World War II. During the Cold War, they were part of the vanguard of the Soviet vanguard in East Germany that if there was a war would have been given the responsibility of racing through NATO lines and getting on the Rhine River. They were decommissioned at the end of the Cold War, but in 2016 the Russians brought them back. Why? Because it looked like NATO in Russia were starting to heat things up. NATO was deploying these battle groups into the Baltics, into Poland, and so the Russians rebuilt these units, and these units were configured for big aero offensive and defensive operations. They were designed to fight a NATO enemy. Doctrinally, they were prepared to receive a NATO attack and then launch a counterattack to destroy the attacking NATO forces. They were purpose-built to fight NATO. And as I just said, the Ukrainian military today that launched this attack in Kharkov is a NATO military. It's using NATO tactics. Everything about it is NATO, except they're not speaking the English or French. They're speaking Ukrainian, although apparently a lot of them are speaking. But the point is, the Russians should never. What happened to the Ukrainians in Kherson should have happened in Kharkov, but it didn't. And you have to ask yourself why. Well, one of the reasons is that's just the reality of conflict. Conflict is cyclical, especially offensive conflict. And the Russians, since they transitioned to phase 2 at the end of March, have been on the offensive in a consistent fashion with no major pauses. And finally, the Russians said, we're pausing in August. We're hitting the pause button because these units are worn out. Even though they're winning, you can only go on the attack for so long. At some point in time, you got to say, boss, time out. We got to go back. We got to eat. We got to sleep. We got to take showers. Guys got to make phone calls home. We got to, refit, get ammunition. We got to get our equipment repaired. We got to get us repaired. Basically, it's a pause for the cause. Every military does it. When we went into Baghdad or in Iraq in 2003, we had to pause outside of Baghdad as prior to the Karbala offensive. We had to take a pause because we had outrun our logistics. We had to hit a halt, get the logistics to catch back up to us and all that stuff. And that was only after a period of a couple of weeks. The Russians have been doing this for 5 months. So they hit the pause button. And the other thing is the Russians were preparing for their own offensive in the autumn offensive. In order to prepare for that, they had to withdraw units back to Russia and get them up. And some of the units they withdraw came from the 1st Guards Tank Army, 20th Combined Arms Army. So now you have a weakened force structure in Kharkov. Normally what happens when you withdraw frontline units, you'll bring in designated reserves. of similar capacity, similar capability, and they'll replace you. And you can maintain your doctrinal defensive alignment. The Russians didn't do this, though, for some reason. In certain sectors of the Kharkov front, instead of putting conventional rifle battalions on the front line, they put special police units, OMON, SOBR, SOBR. They put militia units from the Donetsk People's Militia. They put National Guard units, which are, just a fancy name for Ministry of Interior troops. And these guys don't have the same doctrine. They don't have the same training. They don't have the same equipment. And you put them on the front line of a major combat area. And not only that, they didn't put enough of them there. So whereas in Kherson, when you had one strong point in a village and another strong point in a village, you might have a kilometer gap between them. That's enough for them to have effective fires to block that. In Kharkov, sometimes you had 5 kilometers. So from one strong point, the next Russian unit was 5 kilometers away. So that's a 5-kilometer gap, and there's nobody in the middle. And here's the other part. There's no defense in depth, meaning that once you get through that initial point, you could go 20 kilometers until you hit the next Russian unit. That's insanity. And where was the artillery? They had stripped all the artillery away to go to Donbass to wage that meat grinding combat we talked about. That's very successful, and that slow but steady advance through the Donetsk People's Republic. Where Wagner is doing the outstanding fighting. Again, outstanding from a military professional sense. I'm not taking sides here. The performance that Wagner's doing outside of Bakhmut is needs to be commended from a professional standard. They're succeeding, but they succeed because they have a lot of fire support, and that fire support came from other units that were stripped away. And this was done in Kharkov. What should have happened, if you're going to thin out the ranks, you need to double down on artillery. You need to have pre-registered kill zones with the artillery ready to fill that gap, that maneuver by fire that we talked about. But they didn't have that. And here's where it gets. This is the problem. So there's a sloppiness, there's a complacency that took place upon the Russian command, and then there's an intelligence failure, because everybody on the internet knew the Ukrainians were building up their forces. I mean, I can go back and find Telegram reports. I can find, even though I don't have a Twitter account, I can scour Twitter and I can find Twitter commentary. Everybody's saying, "Oh, they're moving this unit, this unit, this unit, this unit, this unit," and they're equipped with the NATO equipment. These are the reconfigured brigades. People are naming the brigades. They're assembling in Kharkov. They're assembling away from Kherson. And if we know that, there has to be the Russian equivalent of Scott Ritter, who's watching that as well, looking at it going, "Holy beep, they're building up their forces." Well, this is the thing. What happened? First thing is the Ukrainians have the benefit, because they're a NATO army now. So they have the benefit of American and NATO intelligence. So they're getting the extremely high
right. I saw in the Telegraph, they're saying the British and American intelligence were working in tandem with the Ukrainians. So they're
working
sort
in tandem.
They're already
they were
admitting
doing it. Yeah, they basically said, here's the force layout. This is exactly what the Russians are. They named the units. They said they're here. There's a 5-kilometer gap. They have this artillery here. If we rush this gap, we got nothing to block us for 20 kilometers. So let's build up the forces, but we're not going to initiate there, because if we start in Kharkov, the reserves will be committed and they'll seal us off, and then they'll probably push us back. So we need to lead in Kherson, get the reserves committed, and then we need to attack. And when we attack, we use new tactics. We don't go back with the old school approach, dismount, let's move forward slowly and allow the Russians to beat the hell out of us with artillery, hit us with long-range fires. We all die, we retreat, we go home. No, this time we're going to stay mounted like NATO does, and we are going to rush the defenses. We're going to use speed and audacity, and we're going to come up to them. We're going to surround them, surpass them, move through the kill zone, get in the rear, and keep going. Don't stop. And that's what they did. Now, here's the thing, though. It was predictable. Anybody could have predicted this. Why didn't the Russians? I have enough respect for the junior Russian analysts to believe that they sat there and went, "Whoa, we got problems, boss. We're getting chatter on the SIGINT. They're coming in. The buildups here. We got the imagery. I see a lot of fuel coming up. I see a lot of ammunition coming up. I see preparations taking place. I think they're going to attack, and they're going to attack here. And when they attack here, they're going to break through. We got nothing to stop them. We're in trouble. We need more men." And now that's the problem, because, see, he said, we need more men. Now it goes up to middle management, and middle management looks at it and says, he's probably right. Here's the problem. I've been told by upper management, they don't want to hear about more men. They said, don't ask us for more men. You're not going to get more men. So rather than me go up and tell them this awful news and get yelled at, maybe get fired, get to Siberia, I'm going to massage the report a little bit and hint there, and then take it up. And then the upper guys looked at it and went, yeah, we got this under control. They've done this before. We'll push them back. It's no big deal. We might lose a village here, but eventually we'll counterattack and push it back. It's okay. Everybody go to sleep. It's fine. They wake up in the morning, and the Ukrainians have punched through the line, 20 kilometers deep in, hooking around, and it's gone to hell in a handbasket. It's the worst intelligence failure since 1973 Yom Kippur War, when Israel failed to predict the Egyptian crossing of the Suez Canal. It's the same level of absolute failure on the part of the Russian intelligence services, and heads need to roll. Literally, somebody has to pay the ultimate price. I'm not talking about death. I don't think that. I mean, your career's over. You messed up. You were given a responsibility, and you failed. The intelligence officer's job is never to tell his boss what he or she wants to hear. If that's what you think your job is, an intelligence officer, quit, go home, go fishing, do something. Your job is to tell them the truth, the hard truth, and nothing but the truth, and let the chips fall where they may. I've done that my entire career, and I'm not a very popular guy. But every time I stood up and put my foot down and said, nope, this is the assessment, I'm sticking with it, I was proven right. And that's what the intelligence officer's job is. Put your bayonet in the ground, fight and die on that hill. They didn't do that. As a result, they wake up in the morning, forward units are surrounded, enemies deep in the rear. Now, what do? You've already committed the bulk of your reserves. They've gone to Kherson, and you can't uncommit them because there's a major battle going. Right. The Ukrainians are continuing to fix Kherson with these attacks. All the Russians are sitting there going, we're killing Ukrainians, we're killing Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians are saying, we want you to kill us because we're fixing you in place, you idiots. We own you right now. We've taken control of the battlefield. We have fixed you in place in Kherson. There's not a damn thing you can do about it. And we're pawning your butt up in Kharkov. Ha, ha. And that's the reality. So now the Russians have a choice. Do we fight and die in this big mobility battle in Kharkov? Because they could have. I mean, they have reserves. They have limited reserves. They could have gone in and tried to blunt the Ukrainian attack, get involved in this, who can outflank whom, etc. But here's the issue. The Ukrainians have the advantage. The Russians are in reactive mode. And if you've studied maneuver warfare, you know John Boyd's OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. And if you can get inside your opponent's OODA loop where you're making decisions quicker than they are, you're going to win every time. So now you have a NATO Ukrainian army with NATO intelligence, NATO operations, NATO command and control. Their OODA loop is as tight as it can get. And you have the complacent Russian losers who failed to set up doctrinally, who are back on their feet and punched around. Their OODA loop is as big as this. And if you take a big OODA loop against a small OODA loop, you're going to lose every time. And somebody finally woke up in the Russian high command and went, we're getting our butts kicked. So what do we do about this? Do we sacrifice our men, try and hold on to worthless territory? Because what does Kharkov Oblast bring to Russia in the big picture? Not a darn thing. So are we going to sacrifice everybody in this kind of Manstein type, post-Stalingrad maneuver outside of Kharkov in World War II? Or are we going to preserve the most precious resource we have, which is our manpower? And remember, it's even more precious when you're dealing with a military capped at 200,000 because of the special military operation. So do you really want to sacrifice 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 Russians in the political consequences of waking up in the morning, seeing thousands of prisoners being paraded down Stepan Bandera, street in Kiev. Oh, so they took their reserves, they forced their way through the Ukrainian forces, and they rescued those police units. The ones that I was making fun of early on. I ain't making fun of them anymore because those son of a guns, they fought like bandits. They dug in, they didn't surrender, they didn't retreat, they didn't panic. They're not trained, equipped, or whatever to deal with armor, mechanized infantry. And I say this as a military professional. Hats off to you guys because you stood your ground like the heroes you are, and you blunted the Ukrainian offensive. You prevented the biggest breakthrough. It's like, if I got a bunch of water coming down the street and I put a bunch of rocks in the middle of the street, I'm going to break up the water. The water's still going to go. It's going to flow around and move, but it's not going to go down as high a pace. These guys were the pile of rocks, and they're in the Ukrainian advance. And they stood their ground, fought bravely, they didn't surrender, and then they were rescued, and they were pulled out. And again, I mean, when the history's written about these are one of those moments where you realize how brave the Russians are. I mean, and I'm not denigrating the Ukrainians. I already told you. You know what kind of courage it takes to do the offensive that they've done?
Right.
These are the biggest cojones in the world. The Ukrainians are brave. They're gallant. But the Russians are too. I mean, that's the tragedy of this whole military conflict is you have two quality militaries going at it with brave men who are giving their lives. And,
it's senseless.
The courage, the dedication, and it's just being sacrificed on this battlefield by both sides. But the Russians got these units out, and then they had to make a decision now to rapidly withdraw in good order. It's not a rout. This isn't the destruction of Army Group Center in World War II in the summer of 1944 when German Army Group Center collapsed. And I mean, the Germans are literally running for their lives with the T-34s behind them, crushing them as they go through them. No, the Russians are withdrawing in good order, but they're withdrawing. They made the decision, get out of Dodge. And so they pulled back. They pulled back into Russia, and they pulled back along the Oxal River, and they've built a second defensive line there.
That's what I was going to ask you about, Scott, because I was quoting this yesterday from Al Jazeera. They said that according to certain analysts, that this retreat from the Kharkiv region, they didn't leave any equipment behind, right? And when fleeing armies usually leave equipment behind, they burn it, they break it. Okay, but that's what I was going to ask you about. Did this look again like something rushed? Because at the end of the day,
this is rushed. This is as close to panic as you get. I'm not buying into the pro-Russian bloggers who are out there going, "This is a trap. The Russians are playing five-dimensional chess. They own you guys. They let the Ukrainians think they're winning, but they really pulled back to this defensive line. It's brilliant, genius, and it's a big trap." No, it isn't. The Ukrainians kicked your butt. They got the first punch in, and they pushed you back. You behaved well in the retreat, but it's a retreat. This wasn't planned. You didn't mean to do it.
Right.
You had to.
That was my main question because
they had to do it.
There's both sides, like you just said. People saying that no, this was tactical, and others saying like no, you were on the run. On the run is a little too harsh too. On the run, the Russians never lost control. I just want to pull up the map just very quickly so people can see. This is from the BBC. You can see the comparison. 6th of September, 12th of September, and what's in purple here, these are the gains that the Ukrainians made. Now, we're on the 15th of September now, so I'll give you the updated map, which is this one. And again, the whole landscape has changed.
Yeah, no, it's a dramatic change, but I'm not in control. I don't know. Can you put up that first map?
Of course. Just a second. There we go.
All right. See all that area in red there that then turned purple on the second one?
Yep.
You know why it's red? Because there's Russian troops there. Okay. The Russians, keep the map up there and let me ask you the following question. Let's forget the news story. Let's say you didn't know that this happened. If I just came to you and said from 6 to 12 September, there was a big battle, and the Ukrainians lost 3,000 to 5,000 dead, and the Russians lost 200. Who won that battle?
I would say the Russians.
Right. So now we throw up the map. All right. The Ukrainians sacrificed a whole bunch of guys to get that purple. the Russians lost virtually nothing. All those Russians that used to be on the left-hand side are alive. Most of them now have been squeezed into this new defensive fighting position. Remember, we talked about frontages, big frontages? There ain't big frontages anymore. This is a solid defensive line. The others have gone up into Russia and are regrouping and will come back behind and help finish the assault on the Donbass. So Russia's position is actually quite strong right now. It's a lot stronger than it was when they had all this red. That's for certain. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, they have a Pyrrhic victory. There's a lot of purple there. So what? They lost their strategic reserves. They bled to death in Kherson. They bled to death here. They're continuing to bleed to death by banging their head up against the Russian defenses, and what ultimately is a futile attack. So I don't need the map anymore. I just wanted to point that out, that all that red it represents troops that are still alive, still organized, and now incorporated into a much more restricted defensible. And remember, it's not just shorter frontage. They have the Oxal River, which is a natural barrier, so it enhances the defensibility of this. And the Ukrainians are just beating their heads against the wall. The other thing that happened here, because even though I talk about they're in a stronger position, keep in mind that you're never in a strong position when you run from here to here, and now you're in the process of digging in. You're still very weak there. And if the enemy's coming at you with enough momentum, enough audacity, they can punch through you and go through you. So the Russians were in a very, very tenuous position. And they did something that was very interesting. And again, I bring this up because a lot of people, when this happened, when it's about time the Russians took the gloves off, this is the strategic air campaign we were always talking about. We should have done this on day one. We would have won this war. And what I'm talking about, of course, is the Russian attack on the electrical power grid for that area.
This brings me to my next question, which was, sure. There are many reports. I dug through them yesterday with the viewers, in the BBC, in the Guardian, and so on, about the Russians bombing the power grid, power stations, and water stations. There are now reports coming in that they've bombed a dam. What I wanted to ask you is what's going on here. Number one, are these reports true? Number two, if they are true, wouldn't these be war crimes because it's public infrastructure, civilian infrastructure? What do you make of all these reports?
Well, A, it's true, and B, it's not a war crime. I'm sorry. I know purists are like, oh, that's civilian power. Well, no, it's actually military power.
How come?
It's power that's used to power up command and control centers. It's power that's used to power up trains.
Well, they were saying there's no more electricity in the streets, like where they're residents. So that's
the
argument.
Russians don't get. It's not like the Russians could come in and go. Let's say the Russians want to knock off. Let's say I'm here at my computer, and what I'm doing right now is considered to be a legitimate military activity, and you want to shut me down. You can send somebody in to go down to my basement and start punching off switches on my my master control board. Or you can just send a missile and knock the whole damn thing out. The Russians don't have the ability to come in and say, we're going to turn off this power, this power, this power, but we're going to leave the lights on at home for the civilians. No, but look at what they did. They struck the power, and in doing so, they froze the front, literally froze the front. All that maneuvering that the Ukrainians were doing, they weren't doing anymore. They froze the front. But within 24 hours, much of that electrical capacity was back up and running. What does that mean? That means that the targeting was very sophisticated and very deliberate. I know a couple things about targeting electrical power grids. I can tell you when we targeted the Iraqi electric power grid, we knocked it the hell out. We hit the right stuff. We purposely said, you're being shut down. So in order to reconstitute it, you have to literally rebuild it. The Russians didn't do that. And the Russians know this power grid. The Russians know how it works. If they wanted to shut it down permanently, they would have. What they did is they hit the area that achieves the result, but allows it to be rebuilt quickly so power can be reconstituted. This means that the goals and objectives of the special military operation are very much in place, which is do minimal harm to civilian infrastructure. Minimal harm to civilian infrastructure. And
right,
here the Russians were in an emergency situation.
Sorry to cut you off, Scott, but I just wanted to say that what they're saying in the Western media and the mainstream media is that this is purely and strictly civilian, right? And they're not mentioning or letting off that this is actually being used for military purposes, because the conventional wisdom and well, I would say the international law is that if a military unit or the armed forces take over and they man something that is usually for civilians, like a hospital, for example, and they start firing from that hospital, then it becomes a legitimate target. So you're saying that? Are you saying that they turned this into a legitimate target, a legitimate military target?
What I'm saying is that electricity is a legitimate military target under any circumstance. If a Ukrainian general hits a light switch and a light bulb comes on and allows him to read a report, that's a military target. You can't argue that electricity is for civilian use only. It's dual use. The military benefits from it. The Russians should have shut it down on day one, like we did in Iraq. It's not a war crime, but the Russians said we're not going to harm civilian infrastructure. The Russians have been playing above board from day one. I know the West will never give them credit, but the fact is, the Russians have been coming in with a very soft approach. Even this approach, which was an emergency situation. Understand that a lot of people are saying this was punitive in nature. No, it wasn't. It was an emergency situation where the Russians had to carry out strategic strikes against the electrical infrastructure of the areas that impact the front immediately. If this was shutting down the entire power grid, how come Kiev still had power? How come Lvov still had power? How come the cities in the West still had power? The only cities that lost power were the cities involved in the immediate activity related to the front. So that's that. Now,
so in Kharkov,
the other thing they did, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just, again, reminding the viewers that this is mostly in Kharkiv where the electricity was out. And what about the water in the dams? Does that count as well?
Here we come to that, because so the Russians take out the electrical grid and they slow the Ukrainians down. And this, again, buys Russia time now to get their defenses in order. And that was the purpose of it. All they need to do is buy 24 to 48 hours so that the guys that were on the run out of Kharkiv, who are now on the Oxel River, can actually dig in, get their overhead cover in place, because Ukrainians have a lot of artillery, and get their ammunition put in properly, get it dispersed properly, camouflaged properly, get the defense set up. You need time. You need some breathing space, because these guys are getting the crap beat out of them by the Ukrainians, who are just pushing them and pursuing them. So you buy time by shutting the grid off, freezing the Ukrainians in place. But look, again, if the Russians wanted to shut down power forever, they would have. Power's back up. The people got their water. The people got their electricity. The people aren't suffering at all. So, and think about the number of civilian casualties. I think you can count them on one hand. It's always tragic when a civilian dies, but believe me, if this was a punitive attack against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, the Russians could have done it in a way that killed a lot more people. This was very responsible, specific, military-oriented targeting undertaken by the Russians. Now, the dam. Here you have a situation where the Ukrainians are building up a big force that's preparing to strike against the Russian defenses in the vicinity of Zaporizhia, I believe, in that area. Kirovoy Rog is the city. You have a river coming through. Over time, the Ukrainians, together with their NATO allies, I think the British had a big role. They put in a whole bunch of bridges over this river, and they're pontoon bridges, and Ukrainians can freely supply these forces, move their forces back and forth. And this is a problem for the Russians because, again, they're in a very fluid situation. They're trying to settle their defense, but they've shifted their reserves. So there's a lot of movement taking place on the part of Russia while they try and get this in. And the last thing you need while they have this fluidity is for the Ukrainians to come in and hit a place that might not be perfectly defended. So what do the Russians do? They take out this dam. Now, they took it out in a controlled way. This wasn't the Jamestown or Johnstown Dam in Pennsylvania where it blew up, a wall of water comes down, wipes out towns, people get washed away, 10, 20,000 dead. This was, boom, a breach, water coming through and gradually flooding the city of Kirovoy Rog. And they flooded it, and that was a major logistical place, command and control. and it's flooded. Not too much command and control taking place in a flooded city. But the other thing it did is it raised the level and the speed of the water in the river, and all those bridges were washed away. They are no more. They're gone. До свидания. Have a good day.
It reminds me of dam busters in World War II.
Yeah, well, it's, again, one day when the history is written, the emotions are down, and people can write the history. The future John Erickson write about this campaign. This is going to be something that people are going to write about in praise from a military standpoint. I know the Ukrainians are upset about it, but from a military standpoint, this is going to be one of those critical moments, because by wiping out these bridges, the Ukrainians can't reinforce the troops that they were building up. So they're now isolated. And what are the Russians doing? Pounding the dog poop out of them with artillery and airstrikes, breaking them up. There's no more offensive capability here. These guys are lucky to be alive. What the Russians did is blunt the Ukrainian offense and buy time to further stabilize their front line. So that's where we are today. I think we're looking at the Russians having brought stability and logic to their defense. They have their reserves reaccumulated, redistributed. So any future Ukrainian probe that punch through is going to hit back. They have artillery properly dispersed, fires down. They got their air coming in. All Ukrainian attacks right now are achieving the same result, which is dead Ukrainian. Again, tragic. This is tragic, but that's where we're at. And we're also now, the Ukrainians and the West are waking up. You're not going to read about it in the newspapers, but waking up that these precious reserves, this vaunted NATO army that Ukraine had built up all summer long, is no more. It's gone. It's been killed. It's been wounded. It's been damaged. It's been destroyed. The units that are left aren't nearly as capable as they were, 2 weeks ago. So it's a Pyrrhic victory in every sense of the word. The Ukrainians may be able to get nice photo ops. I mean, there's a lot of selfies coming out from Izium. Hell, the president went down there and took a selfie. But a selfie doesn't win wars. And having a lot of purple around Kharkov doesn't change the fact that the primary military objective for Russia is they call it the liberation of Donbass. Ukrainians will call it the occupation of Donbass, but bringing the totality of the Donbass under Russian control. And that's ongoing. They now have sufficient forces to do that. They also have more than sufficient forces to hold the Kherson bridgehead, which secures Crimea and makes viable the land bridge that connects Crimea to the Donbass. This is all now secured with a solid defense line, troops that are mutually supportive, reserves in place, artillery in place. The Russians are in a very strong position to accomplish one of the stated objectives, which is the liberation of Donbass. But here's the problem. There's two other stated objectives out there.
Scott,
one is go ahead.
Have you been reading my questions? I was going to ask you, did Russia achieve its set out or stated objectives, which was, I think you were going to get to the next one, which is denazification, demilitarization.
Demilitarization, yeah.
How would you view that right now in September 2022?
Are you getting nervous, Richard? Do you think that I have cameras in your room? I'm reading down your paranoia strikes deep. No, look, the thing is, you're obviously an extremely well-prepared interviewer, so because your questions are in logical order and the flow. Like I said, I think they're in position to accomplish one of the three. They're going to, I believe, in the foreseeable future, retake Donbass, and there's nothing the Ukrainians can do to stop them. But now here's the crux: demilitarization. From the Russian definition of what that entails, it was the removal of all NATO infrastructure, NATO affiliation, etc., from the Ukrainian military. I just told you that the Ukrainian military doesn't exist anymore, and it doesn't. The Russians destroyed the Ukrainian military, defeated the Ukrainian military in May, June, and July. All the equipment the Ukrainian military used to have is gone. The structures that existed, they've been weakened, eliminated. Ukrainians were forced to throw territorial defense units, untrained reservists, into the front lines. One of the reasons why they had such high casualties is they had totally untrained troops buying time for these reserves to be accumulated. So they sacrificed men for time. I mean, my God, people talk about in the Soviet Union how during the World War I or World War II, they would just put division online and charge in to
Right.
slow the Germans down. They'd all die. The Germans keep coming. Another division, human waves holding them back. That's what the Ukrainians did. So for all the people out there that are hating on Ukrainians, stop it. These guys are as brave as it gets. Yeah, it's one thing to pull a guy out of the front line who's been shelled for 2 weeks straight, watching all of his friends die, and they make fun of him as he looks scared into the camera and he's shivering a little bit, and you're going, "Oh, the brave Ukraine." There ain't a person out here that wouldn't look like that if that happened to them. Not a person. So stop mocking these guys. You don't have to agree with their cause. You don't have to agree with their leadership. For God's sake, respect them as men, because these guys are doing things that not hardly anybody watching the show and anybody out there would have the courage to do. Untrained troops going to the front line, sacrificing their lives to buy time for their government, for their army, to bring up the reserves necessary to carry out this counteroffensive. It doesn't matter if the counteroffensive didn't work. The sacrifice must be recognized, and that's what they did. But the army that did come in was a NATO military. So now when we're talking demilitarization, what we're really saying is that the entirety of the Ukrainian military has to go bye-bye. How's that going to happen? One of two ways. Either the Russians defeat it on the field of battle, annihilate it, or they get them to surrender and voluntarily disarm, or somewhere in between. Bad news for Russia right now. With 200,000 troops, you don't have sufficient military power to accomplish that objective. You allowed NATO to infuse almost $100 billion worth of equipment and support into Ukraine. You gave Ukraine the strategic depth so they can reconstitute their military without fear of consequence. Imagine if you're a Ukrainian soldier trying to be trained, and every night you went to bed in your barracks outside of Lvov, and you said, "Oh, good Lord, a Caliber missile might come in and kill me tonight." The quality of your training has diminished greatly because you're not focused on this. You're worried about this, and the people who are training you have to be worried too. So they have to alter the training plan, break it up. You can't bring everybody together. But now they get to go to Europe. They get to go to big NATO training facilities in Germany and France, Poland and England, and they get to train without fear. They get a good meal, get good night's sleep. They're happy-go-lucky. And then they come in well-trained, rested, equipped, and they move this unit in, and NATO's done a great job of building rat lines. And that's what I mean is like a smuggling route. Mm-hmm. The Russians, of course, aren't stupid. They're out there trying to interdict, but they're getting beat. Whatever NATO's doing is better than Russia's ability to stop them from doing it. So NATO is successfully getting these troops into Ukraine and getting them to the front lines. Again, none of that offensive would have happened had the Russians been able to interdict them at the border, interdict them en route. Russia didn't, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. So again, make fun of NATO all you want, make fun of Ukraine all you want. They're winning that aspect of the war. When the history's written, we can sit here and say, "Oh, the Russians will get high praise for blowing up the dam and all this stuff, brilliant military." People are going to be studying how Ukraine and NATO got all of these weapons over the border and to the front line, while Russia, with total control of the airspace, failed to interdict them. It's a major failing on the part of Russia, and they're going to have to tighten that up if they want to win. Because if they don't, it's only going to complicate the war going forward, because NATO's just going to keep repeating this puzzle over and over again, this process. So demilitarization, you're going to need many more men. And again, I don't want to sit here and pretend that I can think for the Russians, but I'm pretty good at military math. And when I run through the calculation and all that stuff, they're going to need 300 to 400,000 men to accomplish the task. They can't do it with what they have now. And even with 300, 400,000, it's going to be a slower battle. It's not going to be a broad front all the way across. It means you secure the Donbass, then you go to Odessa. You link up with Transnistria, and then you secure that defense. You get more forces. You go up and you push your way into Kharkov and hook that up and take that area. And in the process, hopefully destroy as much of the Ukrainian military as possible. Meanwhile, you carry out a strategic air campaign in the rear, again, which respects the civilian infrastructure, which complicates your purpose. I will tell you this: that they were hitting civilian infrastructure from what we call civilian infrastructure, rail lines, roads, bridges. If they blew all that, which we did in Gulf War, this rat line wouldn't work. So that NATO, at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that the Russians are actually helping NATO succeed by not doing what is necessary to actually shut down the totality of the people's ability to move in the depth of Ukraine. But that's a strategic decision that Russia made because they don't want to destroy Ukraine. They want Ukraine to be a livable space when this war is done. But they're paying a heavy price for that. So there's that. Now we get to denazification. Hey guys, all you have to do is take a look at all the selfies coming out of Kharkov, and what do you see? Azov emblem after Azov emblem after Azov emblem. Look, yeah, Azov suffered a major defeat in Mariupol. Thousands of them were taken prisoners, but the ideology is alive, and it's motivating people to sign up and join. And the hateful presence of Stepan Bandera is alive and well and living in the Ukrainian military today and in the Ukrainian body politic. And what I'm trying to get at here is saying that when we speak of denazification, it's no longer a matter of simply getting the Ukrainian parliament to pass a new constitution that bans Bandera, getting rid of the monuments, outlawing political parties. It's going to be the total dismantlement of Ukrainian society. When we say denazification, it's going to resemble what occurred in Germany at the end of World War II and what occurred in Iraq at the end of the 2003 invasion, de-Baathification. It's that kind of totality that's going to be necessary to cleanse Ukraine of this ideology, which means it's a virtual occupation of all of Ukraine. This includes Kiev, this includes Lvov. Russia doesn't have sufficient military power allocated to the special military operation to accomplish this task. So they're going to need more military power. So now we come down to the question of, does this mean that it's over for Russia? Well, the short answer is yes, unless Russia's willing to double the size of its forces. Why do I say that? It doesn't mean that Ukraine's going to beat Russia. Ukraine's never going to take Crimea. Ukraine's never going to take Kherson. They're never going to eliminate the land bridge. They're not going to retake Donbass. But what they can do is create a stalemate that has a permanent line of conflict, which means that Ukrainian artillery will forever threaten civilian settlements in the in Lugansk and Donetsk, in Mariupol, in Kherson, even in Crimea. There'll be a threat of drone strikes. This will be a never-ending war of attrition on the line. And you know who wins that? Ukraine. Why? Because they weren't denazified, because they weren't demilitarized, because NATO is now alive and well and living in Ukraine. You don't have to say I'm a NATO member to be a NATO country. Ukraine is more of a NATO country today than most NATO countries.
They got more NATO weapons too.
They have a better NATO military. Here's the thing. I'll say this right up front, that those 30,000 guys that fought and died for the Ukrainians in this offensive would have beat any army NATO has. Any army, with the possible exception of the United States, and only if we reinforced it with forces from the U.S. The existing American infrastructure in Europe could not have stood up to the Ukrainian army. The German army would have been defeated in a week. The French army would have been defeated in a week.
Don't say the British one. Don't say the British one as well.
British army doesn't exist, so it'd be defeated in a day. The fact is, the Ukrainians are really, really good. Really, really good. They're better than anything NATO's got, which means that it takes a lot of effort to beat them. The fact that the Russians are doing as well as they do means the Russians are really, really, really good. But there's not enough of really, really, really good people to beat the really, really good Ukrainians unless you increase the number. So that's going to be the number one task for Russia going forward. I think they have two things coming up, two special reinforcements. The first one is General Mud. General Mud arrives, and my Russian is horrible, but I think it's the Rasputitsa, the muddy season. And when that hits, nothing moving. I'll tell you, when you read my book, you'll see that I mention it as an inspector. When we were trying to simply build something in Vodkinsk, the muddy season came in, and the mud gets everywhere. You're breathing it, you're eating it, it's in your hair, it's everywhere. Your vehicle's bogged down. There's a reason why the Russians build these vehicles with big wheels and high wheelbase, because they're going through seas of mud, and Ukraine is going to turn into a sea of mud, a morass of mud. Nothing's going to move, and this is good for both sides because it's going to bring an operational pause. And then what's going to happen is General Winter's going to come in. And here the Russians have the advantage. They have the cold weather gear. They have better defenses. They have access to heating, food, energy, all that stuff. The Russians are going to be able to ride out the winter better than their Ukrainian counterparts. Already the Ukrainians are screaming they need 200,000 sets of cold weather gear. NATO's only able to give them 100,000 sets. The guys on the front line are going to be freezing to death. Not only the guys on the front line, but the civilians in the back. And believe me, if you want to impact the morale of troops on the front, have the civilians in the rear suffer. It makes the troops on the front feel like crap. So General Winter is going to hit, and not just hit Ukraine, it's going to hit Europe. All these people right now, the political and economic elite in Europe who are providing the support to Ukraine, only exist with the theory of economic ruin. It hasn't hit reality yet. It's still relatively warm in Europe. It's getting colder, though. I bet you the leaves are starting to change. And you know what that means. Then the rain's going to come, sweaters are going to come out, and all of a sudden, frost. And with frost comes ice. And with ice comes snow. And then Europe, I tell you what, if you're religious in Europe, start praying for a mild winter because it's your only hope. Because if the winter is a long and cold one, it's all she wrote. And I believe this is going to break the back of the political and economic elite who have been doing America's bidding in supporting this conflict in Ukraine. And that's to Russia's advantage. So I think Russia is going to ride out this winter. I don't think you're going to see any bold moves from Russia because it doesn't make any sense. Because why not let, when the course of events is unfolding without you doing anything, it's unfolding and everything you want accomplished is happening, sometimes it's best just to sit back and let it happen. Let it go. And Europe has created a situation where once the weather gets cold, everything Russia wants is going to happen on its own. Russia doesn't even have to work at it. What Russia does need to do is find a way to get an extra 150, 200,000 troops. Already, you see there's political controversy. The head of the Chechen Republic has come out and he was very critical. He was like, literally, what the hell are you guys doing? Now, I think he got called in for the special briefing. And when I say the special briefing, I don't mean being treated, because that's not how Putin works. He doesn't sit there and chastise the guy. I think he was brought in and Putin educated him on the fact that this is a bigger conflict, just a battlefield in Ukraine. This is a geopolitical conflict between Russia and the West being fought. It requires Russia to disengage from the West, re-engage with the East, and transition the whole way. It requires a global divorce from the hegemony of the American dollar, which means there has to be a currency basket, which BRICS is trying to build, that is dependent upon stable currencies. Stable currencies. You know what the Russian ruble is today? One of the most stable currencies out there. It's strong, it's solid, it's resilient. You know how to ruin that? General mobilization. Do general mobilization and see what happens to Russian inflation, which Putin is bringing under control. I mean, I know America doesn't follow him because he's evil and he's stupid and he's all that. I listen to every speech the guy gets, and he just spoke at an economic conference in the East, and he said, we're doing well. Our inflation rate's coming down. It's going to come down even more. Our economy is growing. We're making the proper adjustments. That's a man in control, in total control, as opposed to the West, where every day the West gets up and makes up something new. We're going to have to come up with a new economic theory to understand how we're going to react to the rising energy prices. We're going to, let's see, what can we do? We can sanction Russian energy and put a cap on the price that people pay for. That won't work because it'll go out of control. I mean, they don't know what to do. They're just making it up as they go along. Meanwhile, the Russians are like, yeah, we got this under control. But they won't have it under control with general mobilization. General mobilization could, it's going to affect the labor pool. It's going to affect production. Right now, they have the Russian economy is still a peacetime economy, and it's geared towards interfacing properly with a global peacetime economy. What happens when the Russians now have to divert that economy and turn it into a wartime economy, and it's out of sync with the rest of the world at a critical time. I liken this to you got two horses running down the path. One's called Russia's economic relations with the West. The other one's called Russia's economic relations with the East. You got the Russian cowboy or Cossack or whatever you want to call him. He's on there riding, and he's doing the trick right now. He's getting off the Western horse at full gallop, and he's in the process of moving over to the Eastern horse. And it's really cool because it's going to work. Why would you throw a rattlesnake in the middle of that? You wouldn't. That's what general mobilization is. It's a rattlesnake in the middle of this trick, and the rider's going to fall off. The horses are going to panic. It's all going to go to hell. So Russia, I think, told the Chechen leader, that's what's going on, guys. You got to think bigger picture. General Winter's coming, and General Winter is going to make us even stronger because our economy is solid. We got lots of heating gas. We got lots of food. We got everything we need. Europe doesn't. Let's let General Winter come in and hit the guys. What they're going to do now, if they can't do general mobilization, is they're talking about increasing the effort for the creation of volunteer units. The Chechens have a special forces training center in Chechnya that they've been using to train their own forces, but also volunteer forces from around Russia. And it's very effective. The units that come out of that are brought to the Ukraine front, and they're performing very well, very well. What they need to do is replicate that. They need to create more of these training centers, and then they need to tap into Russian patriotism. You don't need general mobilization. Look, in the United States right now, the U.S. Army is 6,000 guys short of their recruiting goals? 6,000 short. Why? Nobody wants to join. There's no patriotism here in America. I mean, we're very good at putting stickers on cars and putting flags out in front and saying USA at sporting events. But the country's lost genuine patriotism, people willing to fight and die for their country, to take the oath. There's a variety of reasons for that, but that we don't have to get into now. But there isn't patriotic fervor, and if it is, it's very shallow. It's paper thin. That's why we, for instance, have to recruit guys who are fat. That's why we have to recruit guys that don't have a high school education. So we've lowered our mental standards, lower our physical standards, and we're still not making the recruitment, numbers. In Russia right now, there's an interesting thing happening. There's the 875th anniversary of Moscow, and Putin attended several celebrations. This was happening right as Kharkov was falling, and they had a fireworks demonstration, and the Russian people are pretty angry about this because the Russian people are saying, "Hey, boss, time out. We got our boys dying over here, sacrificing everything for this cause you said you believed in. You said we were going to win. You said we are winning. Getting our butt kicked here in a damn fireworks celebration? What the heck is going on?" And there's pressure being brought to bear throughout Russia, throughout the Russian Federation now, from the grassroots up to the civilian leadership. No celebrations, none of that. You need to focus on getting the job done in Ukraine, which means there's a lot of patriotic fervor there from a lot of Russian boys who are physically fit and well educated. So they don't have to lower any standards. I think if the Russians opened up the recruiting and made the active pitch on do your patriotic duty, come forward, volunteer, we're going to train you. We have special contract relationships we'll get into, short-term contracts, 2 years, 3 years, or until Ukraine is finished. I bet you they get their numbers. I bet you they'll be able to get 120, 200,000 guys willing to do that.
That's what I was going to ask you about, actually, Scott, because you mentioned Kadyrov, so the Chechen leader. He posted this voice message on Telegram, basically, in so many words, saying what the hell's going on in Kharkiv.
What the hell's going on? Yeah.
And I've seen also.
Good question.
there's a petition being signed now, which was started by Russian not high level officials, but people who work as not government ministers, but who are basically, I guess we'd say the equivalent of MPs in the UK. Is asking Putin to resign, and I mean, I don't think we've seen anything like that until now. Is that to do with what's happening in Kharkiv, and how would you describe the situation there?
I think that's been overblown. Yes, there are people passing a petition around. They've been passing that petition around forever. There's people have to understand that Putin is not a dictator. I know that's hard to believe in the West because we call him the autocratic leader, the absolute president, dictator, president for life. Russia's a democracy. Putin wins elections, 53%, 60%, 65%. Dictators win elections 99%. Go take a look at the last couple of elections Saddam Hussein held in Iraq. It's not a democracy, Iraq was. Russia is. Yeah, it's not a perfect democracy, and it's made less so by Western interference. Let's start off with the 1996 election, the re-election of Boris Yeltsin, bought and paid for by the United States government. We don't even deny it. We've had a Time magazine cover bragging about it. And we've gone from absolute control of the Russian electoral process, where it was not Russian democracy, but Americans imposing their will on Russia through the artifice of democracy. And then we take a look at where Russia is today, because you have to go back there. That has to be ground zero right there. The absolute lowest level of Russian democracy was the 1996 11 election fought by America. So now you're going from there, understanding that continuously the United States and Great Britain are actively trying to undermine Russian democracy. They don't want genuine Russian democracy. They want to be in control of the Russian democratic process. So they're buying off politicians. They're training. They take people like Navalny, pull them out, send them off to a study session in an elite university in the United States. I think he went to Columbia. It's a program known. I don't want to give away the farm, but it's known to be a recruitment for the CIA. All you have to do, big hint, is go through the academic advisors or the people advising that current group and look at their resumes, and it will all become clear what is going on here. Navalny is a CIA asset, recruited by the CIA, recruited by Michael McFaul, by the way, who is at that time the U.S. ambassador. He oversaw the interview process. The CIA said, we want this guy. McFaul gave the proper things. Navalny goes, he gets recruited, trained by the CIA. The British are doing the same thing, MI6, and they're bringing these people in and they're infiltrating them back into the Russian democratic process as the opposition. You can't have an opposition be viable if it's bought and paid for by hostile intelligence services trying to actively bring down your government. It weakens the whole concept of opposition because it requires now the Russian security services to be to view every opposition as a threat. So yeah, Russia's got problems, but there are opposition leaders out there who oppose Putin, who speak out against Putin. It's harder to find them right now because Russia's at war and people are rallying behind Putin. But historically, there's been a group of anti-Putin people in the Moscow City Council and in Russian Parliament who have done these made-for-TV moments where they pass around a petition signed by 6 people calling for Putin's resignation and arrest for treason. And in the past, Russia's done nothing about it. Who doesn't care? You think he's losing sleep over 6, radicals who signed a petition with their own 6 names and do a TV interview because the West is going to eat it up. But the Russians, they don't care. Nobody cares about these people except the people who vote for them. That's why Putin wins all the elections. But here's the thing: it's in time of war when the United States is actively working to generate just this kind of propaganda moment. And that's why this time they got arrested. Now, of course, in the West, we're going, oh, see, Putin is suppressing freedom of speech, suppressing. In the United States, let me put it this way. How do we handle the January 6th protesters, insurrectionists, whatever you call them? They're being arrested and they're being prosecuted for sedition, for insurrection, because they violated the law. Is this suppression of speech? Is this political the extremists are saying that, but the fact is these guys violated the law. They're being arrested. Now, let me take it another way. What would happen if we found out that all these people were being funded by the Russian intelligence service? We'd arrest them for treason. I mean, it's that easy. All these guys being arrested right now are insurrectionists in time of war being funded by hostile intelligence services. They're traitors to their country. So Putin's not under any threat. I mean, the West wants him to be. You read the headlines, Newsweek,
Right.
Forbes, Business Insider every day. first of all, Putin stumbled. He has cancer. Putin sneezed. He has cancer. Putin, had put two hands on the desk. He has, stomach cancer. I mean, Putin apparently has all the cancers in the world. And then they want to say, now they're, Putin's weak. He's paranoid. He's hiding inside the Kremlin. People, the dogs are coming in, surrounding him, barking. Putin's scared, nervous. There ain't nothing scared or nervous about Vladimir Putin right now. He's as level-headed and calm and collected as he's ever been. He knows the big picture. He knows what he wants to do. But here's the thing. I have to say this. Being calm doesn't guarantee outcomes. And right now, Russia has a losing algorithm. They have a winning notion, but they can still lose. They can still fail. If they don't finish the job in Ukraine, Russia loses, because Ukraine isn't just about solving the Ukrainian problem. Remember, before this war started, there was the December 17th draft treaties that were given by Russia to NATO and the United States about reimagining European security framework. That's the big picture here. Ukraine is but a piece of this European security framework, which is the strategic outcome Russia not just wants, but needs. It's existential in nature. So if Russia hiccups in Ukraine, they can't accomplish this grander state. So Russia has to win, and they don't have a winning hand right now. They don't. So Russia's going to have to do something. So, I can't appeal to Putin because that would say that I'm on his side. But I'm just telling you right now, if I were an advisor to Putin, I would tell you, Mr. President, you're going to have to take a close look. And here's the thing about Putin. I'm sure he's taken a close look. I'm sure he understands the risks that confront them. And there's going to have to be major changes made in the way Russia is prosecuting this conflict. But not too major, because Russia, as I said, is winning geopolitically. What Russia is doing in terms of outmaneuvering the United States, the G7, and Europe on the global stage is, again, when people write books about this, this is just going to be textbook. This is going to be the kind of thing that, grand strategists will say, oh my God, this is really, I hate when people say 5D chess. What is 5D chess? There is no such thing as 5D chess. Star Trek invented it, but chess is a 2D game. But the point is, he's a master chess player, 5D chess. Well, yeah, there's something to say about what he's doing right now, because the whole Western world tried to destroy Russia through economic sanctions, and it backfired dramatically. And that's because Russia knows what it's doing.
I'll get to that in a second, Scott. I just wanted to ask you, why hasn't there been a statement? Because from what I can gather, there's been no official statement from the defense ministry. They have their defense spokesperson or the Kremlin. Isn't this what's happening in Kharkiv something to give a statement about? Given the magnitude.
I think so, but I'm not a Russian. The Russians are very reticent. The Ministry of Defense, but here's the other thing too. What kind of statement do we want? During the Second World War, there was a famous announcer, and I can't remember his name, but this shows you what kind of Russian historian I am, or at least it shows how old I am and my memory's gone. But the guy would come up and he would read the news, and he would say, the Soviet army has liberated the cities of X, Y, Z, the towns of, A, B, C, and this. The Soviet army has retreated from the cities of X, Y, Z, the towns of boom, boom, boom. And it was all said matter-of-factly because it was war. And you win some and you lose some.
Leviton.
There was no effort.
Sorry, Leviton was his name, I think, right?
Bingo. There you see. You're good. Or do you have somebody who Googled that for you?
No, I like World War II history.
Okay, well then, thank you very much. You're better than I am. But Leviton, and he was the voice. And so he did that. The Russian government needs to learn to trust the Russian people and just be honest about what's going on. I'm not saying they're lying, but sometimes by withholding information, that's sort of a lie. And here's the other thing about what happened in Kharkov. And this is another reason why I don't believe any of this nonsense about how this is a master Russian, maneuver, tricking the Ukrainians. They abandoned thousands of pro-Russian Ukrainians, abandoned them. They're being killed right now. I'm going to introduce your audience to a name. The guy's name is Gary Tabak. He is, American citizen, a retired Navy captain. He doesn't like me very much. But I'm not bringing his name up because he doesn't like me. I'm bringing his name up because this is an American citizen who is very pro-right sector. He's an American citizen who was in Odessa in May of 2014 with right sector. Gosh, that's red flags if I ever heard one. And he's in Ukraine today, actively working to get the Ukrainian government position known in the West, defending the Ukrainian government. But he was interviewed, and this is the thing. He said that right now in Kharkov, the Ukrainians are hunting down and killing the collaborators. And he's not saying it to condemn Ukraine. He's saying it as this is a good thing. He said, this is what Ukrainians do. They have long memories and they know how to do it. This is an American citizen, former military officer, openly bragging with close ties with right sector, the people who were carrying out the murders, which just opens up a whole bunch of doors I don't even want to go down. But he's sitting there saying that the Ukrainians are hunting them down. Now, it's not just that he's saying it. We know they're doing it because one of the things about murderers and thugs is they get some sort of visceral pleasure out of broadcasting their crimes. So we see the videos of the executed people. And, the Russians have the drone footage of the people being put in trucks, taken off in the woods and gunned down. I wish the Russian government would release that stuff. They will, the war crimes trials that will occur. But, Vladimir Putin in 2005 gave an address to the Russian Federal Assembly. It's a famous address because if you remember, there's the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, that one. But there's the rest of the story because overnight, tens of millions of Russian citizens were left homeless. And then he spoke about the Russian nation, which is different from the Russian citizen. The Russian nation is the cultural and historical bond that exists between peoples that don't have to be ethnic Russian, but they have to be linked to Russian culture, Russian history, Russian religion, the Orthodox religion, the Russian nation. And he said, I am a defender of the Russian nation. And when he gave his speech about why he had to go into Ukraine, he constructed it from a historical perspective that spoke about the absolute requirement to defend the Russian nation, defend the Russian nation. Hey, Putin, you abandoned the Russian nation, this withdrawal from Kharkiv. You owe the Russian nation an apology. And this is where I think the Russian generals have to come out. They need to apologize because, what's supposed to happen in Kherson? It's supposed to be a referendum. How are you going to get the citizens of Kherson now to vote to join Russia when they say, wait a minute, if we vote to join, that's a death sentence. In American history, we talk about the courage of the founding fathers. John Hancock's signature on the Declaration of Independence being so big because he was basically saying, I believe in this cause so much. This is who I am. Kill me. He's telling the British, kill me. I admit I'm betraying the crown. I'm defending American democracy. Well, everybody who sided with the Russians, who took Russian aid, who sent their children to Russian schools to get educated, they sent teachers to get trained to come in and educate. They're all being treated as traitors right now. And many of them are being hunted down and killed by these Azov, Banderas, murderous thugs. I think the Russian leadership needs to give a speech that tells the Russian people that a mistake was made. But we will never abandon these people, that we are coming back. We are going to retake Kharkov. We're going to retake every area where Russian citizens, where the Russian nation lives, that the Russian nation will be secure. That's a message I think needs to be given. If it isn't, then I don't want to use bad language on your thing, but then it was all BS. It's all BS. And when the Russian people wake up and realize that it's all BS, then Putin loses his allure. He's gone. He's finished as a politician. He's not an absolute dictator. He's a president who has a very strong domestic support base right now, but that's a domestic support base that's premised on people believing what he says. You just abandoned thousands of people to be executed, murdered, raped, tortured by Azov Nazi thugs. I think the Russian nation deserves an explanation as to what's going on.
I certainly wanted to touch on that point. I'm glad you did about these punishments or acts of revenge, whatever you want to call them. That basically, it's not just about the Russian military's been pushed back. It's what are the Ukrainians doing now that they're moving back in, and from everything that I've seen, it's SPU. So Ukrainian security services going after collaborators and so on, and and of course everything that comes with that, not very pleasant. Scott, you mentioned Putin attending the summit in Samarkand. So he met, I think, with the Chinese president just today. So what do you think of the whole situation? I mean, you you mentioned winter is coming. Now, I know some countries in Europe, they've agreed to pay for the gas in rubles. Others have said, no, we're going to go it alone. What do you make of all this? And don't talk about the G7 price cap, because that was my next question.
Let me see if my dogs will cooperate while I'm trying to answer this question. I think what's going on with the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, is proof positive that Russia has a grand strategy. It's geopolitical in scope and scale. Its primary focus is economic, and that it's succeeding. I think the SCO is living proof of that success. I think Russia is a very, could you imagine the United States let's say the United States is now in Iraq. We don't have to imagine too much because we did that. We invaded Iraq. But now, after the invasion, when things maybe aren't going so well, could you imagine an American president going to a meeting of the European Union, sitting down with them and looking across the Germans who oppose this conflict, et cetera, and saying, I hear your concerns. I appreciate your concerns. They are well thought out, well reasoned. These are responsible concerns that you have, and I will be addressing them with you going forward. We will work together to come up with a common understanding of what the path forward is. Or does an American president say, hey, shut up, stop arguing with me. You're either with me or you're against me, da-da-da. Imagine the strength it takes for the Russian leader to sit there and talk that way to the Chinese. Confidence it takes. Russia's in control. I don't see Russia out of control. I think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting is proof positive. What happened in that? I think Iran just became a member. Think about it for a second. Iran has just aligned itself strategically with Russia, China, India, everybody.
Explosive.
It's explosive. It's liberating for the Iranians. It's devastating for the United States and all those who have built a policy position premised on the economic destruction of Iran. It's proof positive that sanctions don't work, and they can't work when the rest of the world is united against them. And that's the fact. Russia is part of a global coalition of nations that, even though, like China, many of them have expressed concern and have taken a neutral position. But a neutral position is actually, for Russia, means you're on my side, because it means you're not participating in the sanctions, that you're actively working with me to build up a strong economic framework, fabric that can withstand whatever else the West can put at it. And I won't mention the G7 price cap because you asked me not to.
So, yeah, the G7 price cap. I've already given my opinion about this. Just again, for the viewers, this is basically the EU and all the members of the G7, the US, Canada, the UK, etc., being very mad that Russia is actually still making bank. They're still making a lot of money from their oil sales.
and bills.
They got fat wads of cash and they want to stop it. So what's your thought on this?
Well, I've just thought all along, in the lead up to this, one of my specialties is energy security. I've been doing energy security analysis for a long time now, since 2009. And even prior to that, I dabbled in it, but I've been focused on global energy security since 2009. Um, and I've just watched how analysts have consistently overplayed the position of the West to the detriment of the Russian perspective. And it always struck me as sort of curious that when you have a nation that's like the number one, overall producer of energy in the world, to somehow diminish their philosophy about global energy security. I would think that if I'm, for instance, the largest gasoline distributor in the state of New York, that my job is to keep all the gas stations functioning so that you, the pathetic American population, can get in your cars and drive around freely. All that great mobility you enjoy is only because of me, because I have the gas stations and I provide you with the gas. And yet you're going to mock me and say, you don't know anything about the economy. You don't know any, I don't know anything about the economy. I don't know anything about diesel prices and how they impact supply chains because of the cost of transportation. I don't know that. The guy who runs the gas stations, I know it better than you. I know it better than anybody. Russia knows this better than anybody. They know everything. This is why when the United States, with its arrogance, because it used to be during the Cold War, we had, a bifurcated, global economy and relationship. So we could come to the Saudi Arabians and set up this deal where we traded guarantees of security with Saudi Arabia, ability to put their foot off and on the production accelerator. When we need more oil, put the accelerator on. When we need less oil, take the accelerator off. And we were able to control the world's economy to our benefit, by the way, no one else's, our benefit. Prices were always done to make American politicians have domestic political victories at home. But that time's over. And we saw that with the pathetic performance of Biden in July, crawling on his hands and knees to meet with MBS, who he said during the campaign, I will never meet with this man. He is a pariah. Saudi Arabia is a pariah. We're not going to deal with these guys. No, we're going to put them in the corner, treat them like the garbage they are. Oh, no, wait a minute. Russia's, we need oil. We got high prices at the pump. Please, MBS, be my best friend. Fist bump, boom, yay, dance, whatever you want to do. We're buddy. And meanwhile, MBS is like, hey, don't try and lecture me about Khashoggi. And I'm not here pretending that Khashoggi's death, I'm not minimizing. Please don't anybody think I'm doing that. I'm just saying, instead of the United States having the moral high ground and saying, shame on you, we're fist bumping the dude. We're begging the dude. And now the dude gets to flip it on us. Don't talk to me about Khashoggi. I'll come back with you, Abu Ghraib. I'll come back with you with the murder of the Palestinian journalist.
Shireen Abu Akleh.
I beg her family for forgiveness. As I said, I'm getting old. But they murdered this American citizen who's a Palestinian journalist. They murdered her, and the Israelis now admit, yeah, it was our bullet that did it, and we're not going to do anything about it. Where's America? I mean, that was an American citizen killed. Khashoggi wasn't an American citizen. He was a Saudi citizen who wrote a blog for the Washington Post. He had friends in the American journalism area. I'm not saying that it's okay to kill him, but I'm saying if you're going to scream and shout about Khashoggi, then why aren't you screaming and shouting about the Shireen?
Right.
Why aren't you? Why aren't you doing to the Israelis what you said you were supposed to do to the Saudis? Hypocrisy reigns supreme. And what Biden did is allow MBS to level the playing field with moral equality, to say you're no better than we are. You do the same thing we do, so shut up about it. And Biden couldn't say anything because he needs the oil. But here's the irony of it. And to show you again, we get back to why I brought this up, wasn't to highlight that, it was to highlight Russia. The Saudis turned around and said, yeah, we hear you about the need to increase oil, but it's July. We're having a big meeting in August. The big players, OPEC plus.
Right.
Who's the plus in OPEC? Russia. And that is where we'll make the decision about how much oil we're going to do. So the irony is that Biden went to Saudi Arabia to beg for oil production increases, and the Saudis said, we'll consider it, but the people that are going to consider it include Russia, who is the deciding vote, which tells you Russia runs the whole damn thing. And this was knowable. I knew all this before they sang. That's why I'm sitting there going, you're going to sanction Russian energy? Don't you understand that they know it better than you know it? I tried to tell that to my fellow analysts who study this. I said, the Russians are going to win because you guys are buying into a Western narrative. You're doing the worst thing a journalist can do, which is to fail to check your sources, to simply repeat what you're being told by people that have a vested interest politically, economically in the outcome. And the end result is absolute total failure across the board in the West. The Russians are in control of this. And now we come to, this reaction. The West hasn't gotten it right yet. And to prove how intellectually dysfunctional they are, they think they can actually, at a time when they desperately need Russian energy, there is no alternative. They think they can say, we're not going to buy any. And not only that, we're going to try and prevent the Russians from making money on this by putting a price cap on it. So we're going to create the conditions where the norms of international competitive economy dictate prices are going up. I mean, when you have great need in smaller amounts, prices go up. And they think that they're now going to flip the narrative and say, I can't shut the dog up. I need to pour.
I didn't even notice, actually. I was just focusing on what you're saying.
Pardon?
I didn't even notice. I was just focusing on.
Okay, well, if you can't hear the dog, then it's mainly in my ear. But the point is, it's not going to work. And here's why it's not going to work. It's not because Russia's going to make it fail. Russia will make it fail. But now let me put on my international energy company CEO. Okay, I'm the guy that for the last 50 years has made the global economy work. And you know how it works? I know people hate me, despise me, because I'm wealthy. You want to know why I'm wealthy? Because you all need energy, and it's a commodity that I provide, and you're going to pay the price you need to pay to get it. I'll try and give it to you low, but in order to get it to you low, I need to go out and make multi-billion-dollar investments that project 30, 40, 50 years down the road. All right, so I'm going to invest an awful lot of money up front to put in place infrastructure that then has to deliver a product over a long period of time. This means I need stability. I need stability over the long term. I don't need wars. I don't need any of this garbage. I need long-term stability. And when you destabilize it, I have to offset the disruption of this long-term stability by raising the prices. Want to know why? Because at the end of the day, I don't report to a voter, not your kind of voter. I report to a different voter. It's called
a board member.
It's called the board. I'm responsible to them, and all they care about is the bottom line. And so you're telling me right now that you screwed up. You screwed up by sanctioning. You disrupted this wonderful machine that I built, a machine that's giving you energy at affordable prices so all you guys can be employed, drive cars, and do well. You screwed up. You sanctioned the world. You've disrupted everything. And now I can't offset my losses by charging you a fair competitive price. It's not my fault that prices have gone through the roof. It's your fault. And the CEOs are just going to sit there and laugh at them. They're going to say, are you high? And you're going to tax me now? You're going to come in and tax me? You really want to go to war against energy companies? I don't think any politician will ever survive that. For better or worse, they have the strongest lobbies in the world. And here's the other thing that's going to happen. The CEOs, again, their job is to make money. And what they'll do is they'll offset these losses by stopping to invest. So you know what's going to happen in a couple of years when Joe Biden or his progeny come out and say, we need the American energy companies to start drilling, start investing. And they're going to sit there and say, pound sand. We're not doing that because the last time we invested, you sanctioned Russia and it all went to hell in a handbasket. We lost a whole bunch of money. So we've created a financially stable relationship. We're going to make money. If you need energy, get someone else to do it. We don't trust you anymore because the last time push came to shove, you put a cap on sales and you taxed our profits. stick it in your ear. You can't ask a company to invest 50, 60, 70, 80 billion dollars in something that you end up pulling the plug on midway through. And that's what's going on with all this. So no, this policy isn't going to work. It's not going to work well.
I mean, I was just shocked when I did a double take when I saw that. I was like, how are you putting a price cap on something that you have nothing to do with, And the funny thing is they want to allow countries to buy it just enough so that Russian oil is still making it to the
right. But here's the funny thing. You ready for some world-class hypocrisy? Here's the United States. We have a lot of refineries in the Gulf Coast area. All those refineries are, because one kind of oil is not the same as another kind of oil. It gets refined differently. It has to be configured. These refineries, these massive refineries, are configured to receive a specific kind of oil, which they then they break down and all that kind of stuff to produce the product. Most of this oil was the refineries were built to deal with Venezuelan oil, a special grade of it. And then we, in our genius, we said, no, we're going to sanction Venezuela. But that's okay, because we knew in Russia, in the Urals, they produced a grade of oil that was virtually identical to the Venezuelan oil. So as long as we kept that Russian oil flowing in, put it in the refineries, we could make enough gasoline, keep the economy moving. So we were buying, hundreds of thousands of barrels of Russian oil a day. And now we've said nobody can buy that oil. So what's going on? We're buying that oil. Now, we don't buy it from the Russians. Oh, no. You see, the Russians sell it to the Indians, who then resell it to us, and we're paying twice as much. Not twice, we're paying a lot more. But we still, because we need it, because we can't spend the billions of dollars and you know what the American industry is doing, what the American great American journalists? We don't see anything. We don't hear anything. We don't want to say anything.
Yeah,
it's literally the three monkeys. And it's ridiculous. It's the same thing with gas. Europe is buying gas from resale, and so they're paying through. There's a reason why the European factories are shutting down. You know this better than I do. Especially smelters, people that produce aluminum that smelt. You need a bunch of gas to run these furnaces, smelters, and when that price goes through the roof, you can't afford to operate the smelter anymore, because whatever you're producing, smelting, you're not going to make enough money selling it to offset the energy cost. So you hit the off switch, the factory shuts down. And that's happening because they're not, Europe is waking up to the reality that the only reason why they had this wonderful European economy for the last couple of decades that allowed this wonderful socialist lifestyle with, extensive vacations, with healthcare, with education, all this stuff paid for, is because they could build a viable tax base on the back of cheap Russian gas. Cheap Russian gas made Europe what it is. That's just a statement of fact. Try and argue otherwise. You can't. If Europe had to pay market prices for the gas it needed to build this economy, it wouldn't have trillions of euros worth of money left over to redistribute. They have saved trillions of euros by buying cheap Russian gas. And now they've slit their throats. It's done. It's going through the roof. The economy's going down. The Svidania, sayonara, whatever language you want to use, it's over.
I saw a steel plant. Speaking of, you mentioned smelting. Let me just say something. In Germany, you have about 40 major steel plants that have written a letter saying that they're an open letter that they're gonna shut down unless they rein in these energy costs. And of course, in the UK, the energy regulator lifted the price cap by 80%, meaning people are going bust. They're closing their pubs, their businesses. They can't afford the heating at home. I mean, I'm really impressed by this genius.
It's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
I mean, unless there's some, wonderful official out there hiding in the EU and the United States who's playing 5D chess. And midway through this, suddenly we're going to find out that, oh no, it's a computer game actually, and we've broken in. I forget what they call it, but when you get in there and you magically give yourself more resources, you know, and suddenly instead of having 50 gold, you have 5 billion gold, and
Age
you
of
can buy
Empires.
yeah, that kind of stuff. You know, and suddenly we find out that no, there's magically going to appear an entire fleet of LNG tankers, and port facilities will overnight be adapted to receive them and bring them into an infrastructure ready to absorb liquid natural. And wow, Russia was wrong. The Americans are better at energy than they are. Unless you believe in that kind of fantasy, I think we're looking at a very difficult winter for.
How are the gas prices where you are?
Well, they're under control, but they're under control because we're buying Russian oil and we've depleted our strategic oil reserves. We've drawn them down. At some point in time, we're not going to be able to do that anymore. And remember, the worst hasn't hit us yet, because when the European economy collapses and all this stuff, remember, Europe slit their own throat. Russia's going to be able to absorb the lack of a European market. Why? Because the European market has divorced itself from Russia. Russia's already found alternative sources for this. And you know what's going to happen to the Europeans? They're going to continue to seek to buy Russian energy through indirect sources. It's not as though Russia's deprived of the European economy. Russia is going to continue to have access to the European economy, but using the indirect approach. And the indirect approach is fueled by European desperation. I mean, you can never have sound policy when it's built upon the premise of we are desperate, we will do whatever it takes to get access to the energy we need to survive. And that's why they're paying through the nose. You know, the quickest way to solve this problem? Stop the sanctions. You know, Germany still has a viable contract with Russia that Russia will honor. All Germany has to do is say, Siemens, all the pumps go, Nord Stream 2, power up, bring it in.
I don't understand it really. And let me just pull up on the screen. Here's the value: €1 in US dollars. They're equal right now. I mean, you can see from the chart this is actually 5 years, but I can tell you, statistically speaking, this is the worst the euro has been in about 20 years, right? So I think the last time it was this bad was 20 years ago. There you go. This is genius policy making in Brussels and Washington. I mean, really, really.
No, it's going to get worse. Then compare that with the rise of the ruble.
Yep. So I'll just type in here 1 USD in rubles. What do we have? 59. Look at that. Now this is back 1 month. Let's go back 1 year. So this is 59. It's better than before the war. The ruble's better.
This is after sanctions. The ruble has gotten stronger after sanctions. I mean, that's just that tells you how bad sanctions are. And remember, you have to keep this in mind too. If you're a nation that's trying to use your currency to be your fuel and economic engine, the last thing you want is too strong of a currency. So, because you have to make your currency affordable, you can't have rapid transitions and stuff like that. You need a stable currency, a currency with a stable rate of exchange. And so, a lot of what's going on in terms of the ruble fluctuating like that is the Russian government working to keep the ruble stable. Because if you let the ruble do its own thing, I think it would even further adjust against the dollar. But that, again, is unattractive for the global economy. You want a stable, predictable currency. So the Russians have that right now. They have a stable, predictable currency. And the fact they've been able to achieve this stability in a time of global economic war targeting them, again, hats off to the Russian leadership. I mean, it's just you got to give applause where applause is due.
I mean, people, they want to say things like, "Oh, well, this is because of they hiked the interest rates and it's capital controls that have helped them bring the rein the ruble in and stop it from completely collapsing." But it's not true. I mean, we were just talking about how they're still making bank, and on top of that, just 2 weeks ago, just as one example, the Chinese and the Russians, they've signed an agreement where China will pay for gas in rubles. So it's like you were saying, it's actually backed by something. It's not just capital
and
controls
Saudi
in
Arabia
Moscow.
is getting ready to do the same thing. Iran will do the same thing. So, but again, the key to that is Saudi Arabia doesn't want to commit to a ruble price that over a long-term contract, only to have the ruble fluctuate wildly going down the road. The ruble needs to be worth something that's predictable. That's what made the dollar so valuable, is the long-term predictability and stability of the dollar over time. If the ruble can prove that it's capable of doing that, then it's goodbye dollar, goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Rocket Man, whatever song you want to sing, it's gone. Major Tom. I got to go, Richard. Unfortunately, my wife requires me to provide
of course
transportation support.
I was just gonna bring up on the screen your new book, and everybody should get this because it is amazing. This is Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika, Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union. This is by Scott Ritter, and here's the link on Amazon, but it's also available on Barnes & Nobles and at the publisher. I'll put the links in the description, and you can follow Scott over here on Telegram. His handle is @Scott Ritter. And thank you again, Scott, for your time. It's truly a pleasure speaking with you. I can't wait to have you on again, and the viewers are very thankful. We've got about 7,000 people watching. By the way, make sure you guys hit the like button. It helps the video, and more people will see what Scott had to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Have a great day.
Pleasure is mine. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.